Hello everybody and welcome to another IAPC&M CPD and Business Building webinar. I'm Dawn Campbell, your host today, and I'm joined in the hot seat by the lovely Michelle Lucas. Good morning, Michelle.
Good morning. Nice to be here.
Oh, you're very welcome. So I love this title, What's So Super About Supervision? And it's certainly a subject I want to learn more about. Michelle is the director of Greenfields Consultancy, and we actually met Michelle through our relationship with Oxford Brookes University, where David Monroe-Jones, our COO, is studying to become an accredited supervisor and obviously add further value to the IAPC&M members benefits package. Michelle, I know you're a regular speaker. I think it's about 7 years in a row you've been speaking at Oxford Brookes University, isn't it?
That's right, yes. And we missed this year, not because I wasn't on the programme, but because our dear old COVID situation meant the conference was cancelled. So, but I'm all prepared for next year. I think they're going to go online with it next year to make it less vulnerable to the environment. So, yeah. Yes, it's been a delight.
As more and more businesses are, I think you know, this is a turning point. We won't go back to the office situation. I read something like 75% of people will continue home working. Anyway, I know that you're an author of a book and you've got two super webinars lined up for us today. So today is part 1 of 2 and the second one is mid-October. And this is 75 minutes. So please sit back, enjoy, take copious notes, and we'll do questions at the end. But if anything crops up in the interim period, please just put your name, where you're from and what your question is in the chat box, and I'll make sure that Michelle gets that later on. So over to you now, please, Michelle.
Thank you, Dawn. Yes, it is a privilege to be here. And as you say, this is kind of part 1 of 2. So today's really about helping everybody locate themselves in the kind of field of supervision, understanding what certainly I mean by it. And then in October, it's more about the latest book that has just been released, which is 101 Coaching Supervision Techniques, Inquiries and Experiments. And what's important about that book, although it's kind of framed in supervision, almost all of the techniques that we're writing about could also be applied to coaching. So really invite both coaches and supervisors to come along to the next one. And yes, I mean, what would be lovely as we journey through today is if people have questions, as Dawn said, put them in the chat box, but there might also be an opportunity for us to sort of engage in a little bit of dialogue in real time. So especially since we've got a smaller number with us in person today, I can manage that to have some discussion as we go through the slides. And the kind of subtitle to today is really in other words, all the questions you've ever had about supervision but have been afraid to ask. So I do have some slides to go through, but it would be a shame if we left today with you having some questions in your own mind. So as Dawn said, prompt the chat box, use the chat box if you've got anything that's bubbling for you and you'd like to have those questions answered. I've got some pauses, some slides that will allow us to touch base with those questions and hopefully I can answer them. This is the kind of structure of the session. I wanted to do it in bite-sized chunks to invite questions on what coaching supervision is, why it might be a good idea to do some, and in fact at a practical level what kind of things you would talk about in supervision. And then at the end we've got some space for more general questions and answers. So Dawn said that I'm both a coach and a coach supervisor, and it would be really nice just to hear a little bit from two folk that we've got online today. I've been coaching in some shape or form for probably about 20 odd years. It started when I was in corporate, and before I kind of knew coaching was a label, I spent a lot of time one-to-one with the sort of senior managers in the business, helping them work out how they were going to manage themselves and how they were going to manage their leadership challenges. And I think when I look back, that was the beginning of my journey as a coach. Supervision is a more new addition to my portfolio. Dawn mentioned Oxford Brookes. I trained there in both coaching and supervision. and I've been an active supervisor since 2009. So perhaps we could just hear quickly from Louisa and Jean-Hervé in terms of what's your experience of coaching, and I've also be really interested in how familiar you are with supervision. That will help me position the rest of the session. So might I invite Louisa to just share, unmute, and just let me know if you're a coach. I'm assuming you're a coach, and how long you've been coaching and how familiar you are with supervision. Would you mind sharing, Louisa?
No, not at all, Michelle. I've been coaching since 2009, and although I knew supervision was out there, and I've been doing quite a lot of CPD and touching base with quite a lot of coaches and having coaching myself, I didn't realize that supervision was something that's an ongoing thing. So I'm fascinated to learn what you're going to share with us today.
Thank you, Louisa. Yeah, and I think a lot of people first meet supervision when they look at accreditation and then think, oh, I just need some supervision to get accredited. And it's then actually, well, that's actually a feature of your ongoing practice potentially. So yeah, well, ask away if there's any questions as they bubble up for you, Louisa.
Will do, thank you.
Genevieve, I hope I pronounced that right. My French isn't particularly good. Do you want to unmute and share your perspective?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, good morning, Louisa, Michelle, and the other person that I don't see the name. I'm calling from France, and I am already a coach now for a long time, and I'm also supervisor by EMCC. And I'm really, I even decided to be on your program, if you remember,
yes.
with the 101 tools, because I know supervision is taking a very big importance in France and all over the world. And I'm really interested to really become very, very expert in the way of doing it, and not only coach a supervisor, also supervision of other practices that is really developed in France. And
yes.
Even a colleague of mine in New York is interested as well. So I think that there are a lot of things to do with supervision in the years coming.
Yes, absolutely. And I think what's been interesting is that supervision in the coaching field is a relatively new thing. It's always been part of counseling and therapy and social work and those kind of disciplines. And so coaches until now have sometimes had to reach into those other helping professions to have supervision on their work. To your point, Jean-Hervé, I think what might happen now is, now that we have more coaching supervision practitioners out there, perhaps counsellors and social workers might reach into the coaching profession and see what additional difference we might bring to their profession. So that'll be a lovely one to watch. So I wanted to start with a very practical question. Let's think about two coaches for a moment. On the left, we have a coach who's called Alex, and he has 200 hours of coaching under his belt. On the right, we've got Catherine, and she has 400 hours of coaching under her belt. So my question is, who do you think would be the best coach and why? So if you could just use the chat function for us for a moment and just, who would you sort of think was the strongest coach, Alex or Catherine? And tell us a little bit about your thinking on that.
Wow.
Oops. Oh, gave away the next slide then. That's not helpful. Decision time.
Yes.
So thank you, Louisa. We've got a response from you. Jean-Hervé, would you mind
Yes,
muting?
I'm writing also. I will say Catherine, because she's got 400 hours under her belt.
Ah, and that was the same response as Louisa.
Yeah.
So I think it's really interesting, because I think the number of hours that we have under our belt is a very good indication of how proficient we're likely to be. But I think it's also a bit too easy just to say that, because we don't know much about them at this time. What I've tried to do with the colours is sort of suggest that maybe Alex's portfolio may be less hours, but he might have more variety. So he might have more breadth to his practice. Catherine with 400 hours might perhaps serve a smaller customer base, and therefore she'll have more depth in a particular area. We don't know where they were trained. We don't know if they're in supervision. We don't know, how good they are at building relationships. So I think on the one hand, thinking about hours is helpful. It's also quite simplistic. And if I can get the thing to move on, we need to really think about, it's not just either the hours or quality. What we want is both, the both and. And when we think about hours, 100 hours of coaching practice could effectively be 1 hour repeated 100 times. So we could actually be no better as a practitioner at our 100th hour than we were at the first. Conversely, we might have taken that hour and we might have improved it 100 times, in which case we would be 100-fold better than when we began. So the question, of course, is how do we improve each hour? And my suggestion is that we get better through unpicking each hour. First of all, through individual reflection, and most importantly, then taking that individual reflection to coaching supervision to extend what we might see. Some of you might remember this learning cycle. We talk about starting with a level of unconscious incompetence. And I really like the example of driving a car to illustrate this. So when we're sort of teenagers, we look at how our parents drive the car and think, oh, well, how difficult can that be? Just point the car in the right direction and move the stick. And then, and that's a kind of phase of unconscious incompetence. We've no idea how difficult the task is. Then when we take our first lessons and we kangaroo off down the road and we crunch the gears and we hit the curb as we're going around the corner, we become very conscious about our incompetence. It's all too evident that this actually is much more tricky than we first thought. Then there comes a point when we finally do pass our test. We've got our badge. We're okay to be on the road on our own. And if you're anything like me, you had your knuckles, they were white, gripping the steering wheel so tightly, and it was mirror signal maneuver in a very disciplined fashion. I didn't have the radio on. I was thinking about nothing else than navigating my way down the road. And then, of course, practice takes place. We relax. We get we get more practice up, and there comes a lovely point when we can work in unconscious competence. So we're down the motorway, we're perhaps listening and singing to the radio, and we don't even think about changing gear or checking our mirrors occasionally just to be aware of what's around. It all happens really quite naturally. And of course there comes a time when it happened to me. I was driving 1,500 miles a week, and I used to be eating my lunch as I was driving down the motorway. And then we don't have quite enough attention, and there's a near miss. Somebody brakes and we're slow to notice it. And all too often we are really jolted back into that sense of unconscious incompetent. I wasn't driving with care. Now, what's the link between that example and coaching and supervision? Well, my sense is that when we start off as coaches, we very often aren't really aware of the kind of complexity of our challenge. I had a supervisee from Oxford Brookes who was very senior in sales in an organisation, and he confessed to me in one of our early supervisions, he said, going to that course has been really interesting. He said, because I really realise now that for years, what I thought was coaching, I've actually been doing executive telling. And I thought that was lovely. You know, we kind of don't realize we're working with good intent, but we don't realize what the skill set is of being a coach. We go on training and we kind of, for me, certainly it kind of knocked my confidence for a bit because I had to relearn what I thought I was doing well. And then ultimately we grow and we do become competent, and we're very careful about that. Most coaches, I think, really desire to move into this unconscious competence. We talk about working in flow. And I think that's a wonderful kind of time. We're just in a moment where we're dancing with the client, and they're having a wonderful sort of unfolding thought process. However, the problem with that is that we don't quite know what we're doing. It's happening miraculously. And that's why this box is in pink, because I think that's what supervision is about. It's inviting us to pause, to move back from that sensation of flow and to become more consciously competent. Why did I pause with that client at that moment and they then moved into a wonderful wave of thought? Where did that really insightful question come from? Those are the kind of questions that I think supervision is really helpful to help us explore. And it means that we can, over time, have a little muscle which says, as we're about to intervene, are we intervene from a place of conscious competence, or are we just going with the flow? Now, you might still choose to go with the flow, but at least you're doing that deliberately. So I hope that kind of explains, for me, where I think supervision sits in our journey as coaches. So I thought I'd give you a little bit of kind of academic input. These are some definitions about what coaching supervision is. And I'll let you just read that first one for a moment. This is has been written by Tatiana Bakarova, who founded the Oxford Brookes coaching course. And I've highlighted some words in sort of purpley pink. And that's because I think this is what helps make it different. So she talks about it being a formal process of professional support, i.e., it's not just a chat. She talks about the continuing development of the coach and the effectiveness of her coaching, his or her coaching practice. So, you know, there's a point to this conversation. It's a professional supportive conversation. It's about improving our practice. And importantly, she talks about we do this through the interactive reflection and interpretative evaluation and the sharing of expertise. So for those of you that kind of are familiar with the kind of sense of non-directive coaching, there's an invitation here to be not entirely non-directive. We are sharing our expertise, a bit like a mentor might, and we're using our experience to help interpret what's happened. So I hope you can see with this, there's a kind of real invitation for a kind of collaboration and this interaction which helps us build understanding together. This is the second definition, and it's one that I developed with two colleagues, David Clutterbuck and Carol Whitaker. We did it quite a lot later than Tatiana, 8 years on. So we had the advantage not just of Tatiana's definition, but a whole bunch of other practitioners as well. And I'll just let you read that for a moment to soak it in. And you might notice some similarities, but the bits in the purpley pink are what's important to me. So sadly, the word supervision often comes with kind of managerial connotations. It feels like it's somebody who's looking over your shoulder and sort of assessing your work. And that's an unhelpful perspective for supervision, because actually we want it to be a collaborative process. Yeah, I'm sure you say something similar to your coaching clients. You know, you're the expert in you and I'm the expert in the process, but I'm not an expert on you. So there's something about recognizing that the supervisor holds some expertise, but actually not trying to be a teacher in that sense. It's very much a collaborative process of learning. And Louisa, you said something earlier on about, you know, not really realizing it was an ongoing thing. And I think that's a common sort of question. We really wanted in this definition to emphasize that absolutely supervision is part of a continuous improvement process. And as supervisors, we're in supervision too, because every day is a learning day. So it's really important that we don't imagine that there'll be a point in time when we don't need supervision, because there'll always be stuff to reflect upon and uncover. The other thing that we wanted to highlight in our definition was that this isn't just about you and your client. It's not just about the interpersonal relationship that you have, that we need to think more broadly. We need to think about the whole system in which you are working, especially where those of you who work with clients who are in organizations, maybe you're sponsored by their organization, that's going to affect how you show up and how your client shows up in the coaching relationship. So we can't look at it just in a vacuum. And because of that, perhaps we're also inviting people to think about supervision isn't just about getting the best out of the coach, it's bringing value to all the stakeholders that are impacted in the coaching assignment. So it's much broader than just thinking about developing the coach and who is developing the client. We want to think about all of the interconnections that are relevant to that coaching assignment. So I'm going to pause for a moment. It may be that we've got some questions in the chat, or it may be that some of you would like to unmute and ask me a question live in the moment. And David, lovely to have you on board. Nice to see you.
Quite a few more people who have logged on since we last said hello, Michelle. Hello, Klaus. Hello, everybody. So yes, just say who you are and where you're from, and feel free to ask questions, please.
Lovely.
I'll ask a question just whilst people are preparing to introduce, and it's really sort of around a conversation that we've already had in the past, but I think sort of it would be useful to just raise again. Do you think that some coaches, and mentors to to a degree for mentoring, sort of, are frightened of actually going to on one hand, frightened of going to supervision, and on another hand, are puzzled by what they're actually going to get out of it in the first place, and therefore that stops them from going to it. And maybe at a third level, thinking on my feet here, that it's I'm an accredited master coach. Why would I need supervision? What's that going to tell me?
Yeah, no, I think, and it comes back to I do agree the word isn't that a helpful word, because it brings that kind of managerial overtone to it. I prefer the kind of sense of it being about reflective practice. And one of my earlier slides was really about, when we think about the hours of coaching that we do, I'm sure I'm not the only one, that when I finished an hour of coaching with somebody, I look back on that and I think, that question could have been a bit sharper. Note to self. Or, crikey, that went really well. They really got a breakthrough there. Now, you can stop at that point and just go, bad coach, do better at questions. Or you can go, pretty sharp coach, you're on your game. Or you can ask the next level of question, which is, how come that question wasn't as sharp as it could have been? Or how come that flowed really well? Now, some people will ask those questions of themselves and they'll kind of know how come. Other people will ask that questions of themselves and won't really know where to go next. So that's where a supervisor can help. Sometimes some people are introverted and they do a lot of thinking themselves, and maybe they'll journal. And I think it's always quite surprising when you start journaling that new stuff comes out. Some people are more extroverted. So, they could sit on themselves thinking for ages and really get a bit stodgy and stuck. And those extroverts often find that, if you're simply talking with a colleague, then more stuff comes out. And you know, it's not just about working with a professional supervisor. You can work with your colleagues in peer supervision, where, you know, for the sole purpose of extending people's reflection. I think the other thing is that, you know, when you're trained as a supervisor, just like when you're trained as a coach, there's a whole bunch of models and processes that you are immersed in, and they're different to coaching models. So a supervisor that's been trained will have a whole armory of stuff that will help people extend and deepen and broaden their thinking. So, and you know, it's one of those things, don't knock it until you've tried it. You know, all of the arguments you might make for why coaching is a good thing and why people can't just chat to their friends, it's different, it's focused, it's purposeful, it requires a skilled practitioner. All of those things could also be said of supervision. So I hope that sort of speaks to your questions, David.
There's another question here for you, Michelle. What's the difference between supervision and having your own mentor?
Okay, so I definitely think there's an element of mentoring to a supervisor. So we talked at one of those definitions about your supervisor is probably an experienced coach, and therefore they can share their experience. However, I think the coaching supervision role is broader, because a mentor typically would be thinking about supporting the coach. I sometimes describe the supervisor as the guardian of the client. So whilst I will be sort of thinking about the coach that's come to me, I'll be thinking about their client. And we talk about professional assurance, best practice, you know, professional standards. It's a very complex relationship coaching, and sometimes we get towards a boundary. You know, perhaps actually coaching isn't right for this person and counseling might be better. Perhaps there's something that you're concerned about that in an organizational setting you're thinking, oh, who else might need to know about? So those are the kind of issues that you might bring to a supervisor to talk through. Now, granted, some mentors might be able to do that, but I go back to what I said to David, is that a supervisor has been given additional training to help people with frameworks and models that will specifically help them think that through thoroughly.
Okay, and we have another question, this time from Louisa. How do you factor in supervision once per month, as an example? And do you take notes in between sessions?
Great. So coaching is an unregulated industry. So at the moment, there's no kind of requirements of how often. And I think it does depend on how busy you are as a coach. So I know some supervisees who all they do is coaching, and they'll be doing that, you know, all week, if you like. And so they might have quite regular supervision once a month or so. Somebody else might be a coach, they might be a trainer, they might be a facilitator, they might be a non-executive director, they have a whole bunch of things. And so therefore, you know, if they're thinking about how many coaching clients they've got and how many hours they do each month, a month would feel like overkill. So you might do it on a less frequent basis. My suggestion is, if you're going to engage in supervision, that you would do it at least quarterly. That helps you with a kind of discipline, and it helps me as a supervisor with a sense of continuity. There was a second part to that question, Dawn, which I've forgotten.
About note taking in between sessions, I presume from CPD point of view.
Yes. Yeah, so absolutely. Reflection comes in all shapes and forms. If note-taking and reflective logs work for you, great. If you're more of a kind of verbal person, you might do a little recording on your phone and do a bit of free talking, if you like, just to sort of additionally think it through. Or I talked about peer supervision. You know, it's really helpful sometimes to have a little cluster of coaches that can come together and talk things through. And through doing that, you might think, well, that's resolved now, know what that was about. And something else might go, do you know, this is a real pattern, and this keeps up coming again and again. Maybe that's something I should take to my professional supervisor. So there's I think absolutely it's there's stuff that you can do between supervision that helps you and will help your supervisor. So whatever works for you.
So just as we have a coaching log and a CPD log, would you recommend that people have a supervisory log, Michelle, to keep those points of reference?
There's certainly something about if you're in supervision, keep a record of what those hours are, because that might be useful for CPD or accreditation purposes. And I'm not a kind of dotting I and crossing T person. So when people talk about logs, I have a bit of a twitch going on. And I think, what's important is that you engage with it fully. And when you engage with it fully, your thinking moves on, your learning moves on. And in that sense, there's not such a need to make an entry in a log. The only benefit of doing that, I think, is that we sometimes forget how we've learned and moved on. So it can be really lovely to capture those moments on occasion so that we see our journey. But I would go back to, if it's real learning, it's in you. So you can't forget it and you don't need a log. So I'm a bit conscious of time, Dawn. Shall we move on, and we'll pause again a bit later on for any questions?
Okay.
So I wanted to sort of get a bit more practical now about how supervision works in practice. And I've noticed some myths in people. David was saying about people's hesitation about coming to supervision. And I think this might be behind some of those hesitations. So people have a tendency to think that supervision is a place where they bring problem clients. And in that sense, it requires a bit of vulnerability, because you've got to say, oh, I think I'm struggling here. There's also an assumption, I think, that you have to bring to supervision things that have already happened. So you're reviewing what was. Some people kind of worry that they can't just show up and sort of wing it, that they need to do a bit of preparation. And for most of us who are time poor, that's just another thing on the to-do list. And I've also noticed that, especially where you've got people where they've got a portfolio of things, they think, well, I'm only seeing 2 people at any one time, so it isn't really worth doing supervision. People that have got 20 people at a time, clearly it would be helpful. So those are some of the myths, and I think actually there's an element of truth in there, but there's also a counter argument. So while supervision can be a place to bring the people that you're struggling with, when we think about positive psychology, you can bring your successful cases too. There's learning in that. How come you were really on form that day? The assumption that you can bring things to supervision that have already happened. Obviously, it's useful to reflect on what was, but it's also helpful to look forward. When we have got a tricky client, then it might be useful to do a little bit more preparation and to talk through what you think you might do with your supervisor. They could then offer from their experience, their sense of what might land well and what might not land so well. And they could be right, they could be wrong, but they'll encourage you to think about more contingencies that you could offer. There's a sense that you need to do this preparation, and of course that is helpful, but also it's helpful just to show up sometimes, just to start a conversation and to see where it emerges. I know very often when I go to supervision, I will have done some prep, and then there's something in how my supervisor starts that conversation that takes my head to a different place, and we end up talking about something that I hadn't planned to talk about, and it's been really useful. Then there's this sense of, well, I need enough clients to justify doing supervision. But I would say, yeah, of course, there's a kind of return on investment then, but supervision can be particularly helpful when you're just starting out too. That's one of the things I love about the Oxford Brookes course. They put supervision in right from the start so that people have an understanding of how it might complement their practice. And I'd also say that there's supervision as one-to-one and there's supervision in group, and that's really helpful when you're a novice coach, because you get to rub shoulders with other coaches and you can benefit from their learning, and vice versa, they'll benefit from yours. So let's think about some real life examples. Here are 3 things that might be brought to a supervisor. A session went well and you're not really sure why. You might be aware that there's something in your client's story that mirrors your own. or you might be worried that your client might be depressed. And my question is, who might you reach out to? And I'm just looking at the time. My goodness, we've already been going past an hour. So I was going to put you in breakout rooms, but I think that might take up a little bit too much time. So I'm going to fast forward a little bit. Here's some options. If you had those things happening in your practice, these are some of the people that you could reach out to. And rather than thinking about this in breakout rooms, I'll just talk you through some of my thinking about these different avenues of support. When we've got a problem, social media can be really helpful to reach out to because you'll access lots of thoughts and ideas. But social media isn't a very confidential space. So we really need to be mindful about whether or not we would reveal who we were talking about. You could talk to a fellow coach. And again, there would be some sort of benefit to that because you'd be getting a different perspective. But again, we've got to be careful about what we mean about confidentiality. And there's also something around, if you know that person from, let's say, the training that you did together, well, you might be at a very similar developmental stage. So they might only see what you can see. We talked about a mentor earlier on, and a mentor certainly might bring some additional perspective. There might be a tendency, though, for them to kind of say what they think you should have done or what they would have done in your place, which isn't really helping you think about what you would do for you. I think the therapist can be helpful, especially in those situations where we're not sure if we should be dealing with it as a coach. But again, we haven't got a license to talk to a therapist about our client unless we've actually asked our client that we can do that. So I think where a therapist might come in handy is giving us the benefit of their understanding of how would we know if this person is just a bit down, for example, or whether or not they might be clinically depressed. And that might help us inform some of our questions. And of course, I've got the professional supervisor there as an option. And I think that's because what we encourage coaches to do is tell their clients that they're in supervision, which is in itself a confidential relationship. And that kind of gives the coach license to talk very freely with their supervisor about whatever is troubling them, or giving them pause for thought, or making them curious about what's happening in the coaching relationship. So let's pause. I've given you some thoughts about the myths about supervision, and I've also given you some pause for thought about who you could go to with the kind of questions that might arise in your coaching relationships. So let's just see if there's any questions or more comments that we can deal with before we move on.
Just a thought, Michelle. That last comment about having a supervisor, you'd need to put it in your contract that you are with a supervisor and that you will be sharing, so that you don't forget with each new client. It would make sense to build that into your contract as well, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. But if you do a written contract, put it in there. And I think it's always helpful to just, because most clients won't have the first clue about what the role of a coaching supervisor is. So it would be helpful to speak it out with the client and explain how it works. So any questions that we didn't cover from the last break, Dawn?
No, not so far. So feel free to crack on.
Okay. So I wanted to just draw this together because I've been talking about quality assurance, I've been talking about development, and I pulled this together for another professional body. So I call it the House of Supervision. And it really touches upon what kind of things we might cover in a supervision dialogue. Now, at the foundation of our dialogue is a code of ethics and good practice. So as coaches and mentors, there are codes of what looks like ethical practice and what doesn't. Now, when we read them, they always make good sense. But the reality is when you've got a kind of tricky area with a client, you think, well, I get the principle, but what am I supposed to do that would be consistent with that principle? And it's helpful to talk that through because there's always nuance in any client situation. Then if we look at the 3 pillars of supervision, this is where I think it's slightly more than mentoring. So there is a developmental angle, which is about helping people really improve as a coach, either through building on their strengths or through plugging any gaps. Then at the other end, we've got professional assurance, which links to this code of ethics. And it's really about thinking about what is the most appropriate thing to do for this client. This is where we've got those gray areas. We talked a little bit about, should it be counseling or coaching? It could be as simple as the organization has a stake in this coaching assignment. And how do we get their involvement in a way that is helpful, but doesn't blur boundaries, doesn't make me as a coach a line manager, doesn't take away responsibility for the line manager, and is very clear about what will be shared with the organization so that we can keep a confidential and protected space. So those are the kind of things that might come up in professional assurance. And then that middle pillar was actually the pillar that surprised me the most when I was training as a supervisor. I think coaching is quite a lonely profession. There's nobody there in the room as you work. And actually, when we connect with our clients through rapport, sometimes there's what I call the dark side of rapport. So they might be going through a difficult time, and actually it rubs off on us, and we take up some of their anxiety or some of their fatigue or some of their frustration. So where do we offload that? And the place to offload that is supervision, because again, it's a confidential environment, and it may be that there's a kind of cathartic need to express what's going on. Sometimes it's in us because it's echoing something that happened to us before. I see this a lot with my career transition supervisees. They're supporting people through redundancy, and guess what? At some point they were redundant, and maybe there's some unfinished business that working with a client who's redundant throws up. And it's a bit of a coaching-y space sometimes because you're helping people resolve these unfinished issues. And the house of supervision is finished with this roof at the top. I'm calling it guided reflective practice. And that really comes from the training, which allows us to have frameworks and models and techniques, which enable the supervisee to sort of put their thoughts into some kind of order, to assemble them in a way that helps the individual make more sense of them. So that's what I think supervision includes. I'm sure we'll share these slides later. So here's the kind of academic definition of those things. And if we look back to those examples I mentioned earlier, hopefully you can see that each of those fits a different leg of the supervision house. So the session that went well, and we're not sure why. Well, that's a kind of developmental conversation because it would be helping the person get in tune with their strengths. There's something that's in your client story is mirroring your own. This is that central pillar, that kind of supportive, needing to do a bit of cathartic work, but maybe some kind of resolution work too. And if you're worried that your client's depressed, well, this would fit into the professional assurance banner, because we need to be sure, just because we can be a sympathetic ear doesn't mean that we can be a counsellor. So we need to know at what point we need to refer that client to a more appropriate practitioner. Now, when I was putting these slides together, I was thinking, oh, am I getting into a bit too much detail here? Do people really need to know what leg of the house their question fits in? And I thought, well, I think it's helpful. And it's helpful because I go back to the collaborative nature of supervision. I want to put the supervisee in the driving seat. They shouldn't be looking to me to think about what it is they're bringing to supervision. They need to really think through what's going to help them most. That allows me to do what I can do well, which is hold the space for learning. We both have roles to play, and I'll be stronger if you're more in control of what you bring. And you can only be in control of what you bring if I focus on holding the space. So I think if I go back to my supervision house, when you're preparing for supervision, it's not a bad thing to go back through that little model and think, okay, what have I got that's kind of in my development area at the moment? What have I got that's kind of keeping me awake at night or occupying my energy that I might need some support on? And where am I raising some questions for myself about, should I be doing this or should I be referring on? Those kind of things could really help you develop your agenda for supervision. So again, let's pause for a moment and see what comments or questions that's prompting in people.
Yeah, there's a question from Olivia, which is linked, I think, so like a little bit to just your previous slide. And Olivia's asking, ideally, should a supervisory relationship be led by the coach rather than the supervisor?
100%. 100%. So the first question that I ask when I open a supervision session is, what are you bringing today? So technically, I'm leading the session because I've asked the first question, but I'm opening it to for them to decide how they want to work. Or, what are they bringing? And very often, I know that I'm bringing lots of different facets to that relationship, but it's up to the supervisee to decide what they want. And so, there are many times when I have ideas and thoughts about, oh, well, why don't you? But actually, that might not be the most helpful thing I could do. So I need to first check with how they want to use me. Because sometimes, especially those that have been in supervision for a while, they would prefer to kind of work it out for themselves and then ask me, what am I noticing about what they're covering or maybe what they've missed. So they kind of want to be observed so that they can see more than they're seeing for themselves. But that's still, it's for them to decide how they want to use me. So yeah, led by the coach, 100%. And of course, the difficulty is that when you're new to supervision, the coach doesn't really know how to do that because they've not done it before. So that, you can't just start like that. There has to be a bit of explanation, a bit of education, a bit of kind of prompting early on, but with the view to stepping back as soon as the person, yeah, I get what this space is. I know how to use it now. Thank you, Olivia. Any other thoughts or questions?
So just like coaches have a contract with their coachee, when we go to a supervisor as a coach, they will talk us through their contract, and that will help manage the boundaries, the expectations, and what we're going to get out of a supervisory session. Yes?
Absolutely. Yeah. Contracting is key.
Claire
and if you're working in a group,
yes,
then the group needs to create a contract. Because we talk about, oh, what do we want from coaching, or what do we want from supervision? Oh, a bit of support and challenge, please. And that makes perfect sense, except that I have no idea what challenge looks like to you. I have no idea what support really looks like to you. And so we have to have a proper conversation, a detailed conversation about, well, how will I know if it's too much or too little? So that would kind of be the thing that comes into both the group contract and to the individual contract too. Real proper conversations about, how can I enable you to do your best learning?
Okay, thank you. Claire says, I really appreciate the idea of formulating an agenda based on that house model. Thank you. Very helpful.
Good. Yeah. I'm one of those people that likes a bit of structure if I'm doing something new. So it really helped me too. A thank you there from Jean-Hervé. Thank you. Any other thoughts or questions before we move on? Okay, so I am now going to ask you to do a little bit of work yourself. So I've given you a bit of context about what supervision is, and that house model is one way of thinking about an agenda for your supervision. And there's also a number of questions that I often ask people that are coming to supervision for, the first or second time. So if you think of your client work, ask yourself what went well. You can also ask yourself, what are you stuck with? And if you remember, I talked about, you can look ahead, not just back. You might want to think about, what would I like to prepare for? And if people are very experienced in the field of supervision, they've been to supervision themselves many times, then I actually have a really cheeky question that I like to ask them. I invite them to think about, what are you not bringing to supervision? This harks back to what David mentioned about people's hesitation to supervision. There is sometimes a need to be a bit vulnerable, and it's interesting to see what we do and don't bring. And I had a real turning point in my own supervision when I was probably 3 or 4 years into being a coach. And it was the same supervisor as I'd had when I was a trainee. And I thought, how can we keep this fresh? Because I kind of almost knew how she was going to support me when I raised a question. And the penny dropped, and I thought, all I ever bring to her is problems. I never bring to her my successes, because I think I'd seen it from a very kind of, she was part of my training, so I really wanted to sort of do better. And I'd reached a point where actually I did quite okay on a number of times. I was, I was making progress with clients. So we recontracted to say, actually, can we just spend some time when all I do is blow my own trumpet and work out why it went well? And we spent the best part of a year doing that. And it really, really helped me ground my practice. If I go right back to that cycle of conscious competence, then I not only was good on occasions, I knew what made those occasions good. And that is a real building block of your confidence and your groundedness as a coach. It certainly was for me. So maybe we could give people, let's say, 5 minutes in a breakout room, Dawn, if that's okay. We've got, I think, 7 folk, so maybe 3 breakout rooms, if that works. And just get you to think about, what could you take to supervision today?
Okay.
So do you want me to join a breakout room, Dawn, or shall I stay here?
You're joining Olivier.
Okay, I shall join. So about 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And you'll call us.
Okay. We can tell who are the talkers, Michelle. Trying to get them out.
Absolutely. I'm just trying to get my presentation up as well.
There we go. That's it.
What I find really unhelpful about Zoom is that if you're trying to do two things at once, like I admitted some of the people from the waiting room, and because I clicked on one of the menu items, then it didn't recognize that I wanted to click forward on the presentation.
Ah, okay.
It's too intelligent for its own good sometimes. And you probably saw I skipped forward a slide or two on occasions, and that was because I was trying to hit the menu and it thought I was moving forward the slide.
Okay.
It's really a little frustrating. Is everybody back? I was got 6. Okay. So I'd just be really intrigued to hear how those discussions went and whether or not you felt there was something that you might be able to bring to supervision today, and feel reassured that I am not going to ask you to do supervision in front of everybody else. So it's just really about understanding whether or not that has prompted some thoughts about what you could bring to supervision if you were to have some.
Well, I'll go first, seeing as everybody else.
Yeah, thank you, David. I think some people are typing, so we might have some thoughts in a moment.
Waiting. Claz and I were sort of having an interesting conversation. I'll let Claz sort of talk a little bit about what she was, sort of things that she would bring. Because I've started the sort of supervision process, and because I'm also just, as you know, sort of like training to be a supervisor. The question that I was thinking about, and I really like that question, which is you're like, what are you not bringing to supervision? One of the things that I found is that because the people that I've been working with, sort of from a sort of a trainee perspective, bring lots and lots of different things. So you've got you're like maybe technical on one side, but then you've got this is what's going on for me bit. Is that internal sort of conversation of, sort of when I reflect afterwards of, right, was I supervising, was I coaching, was I just like listening, did I actually make any impact at all? How did was there anything in the way that sort of very similar to what you were saying about, well, this is the way that I would deal with it. Was there anything in the way that I asked questions that allowed that sort of your bias to go through? And one of the things that led me to was that the thing that I don't often bring is, how do I feel after a supervision session? Not what have I done, the process bit, or even the questioning about, well, how effective was it, but how do I actually feel internally, like afterwards? So that was a bit of a learning point.
Oh, great.
Maybe that for next time we have a session.
Yes. Well, I think what you touch upon there, though, is the role of the supervisor is multifaceted. So, I said earlier on, there's a little bit of the mentor in the supervisor. I think there's a little bit of a critical friend. I think there's a little bit of a coaching the coach. I think the thing that there's kind of the conversation itself might go in all different directions. And if anybody sort of was the fly on the wall and just saw part of it, they might mistake it for something else. I think, though, the thing that makes it supervision is that certainly from my perspective, whatever the conversation's about, there is a part of my brain that is thinking about the coach's clients. So I'm always thinking about, yes, there's a stream of attention about helping the coach think about things more fully, but I'm also thinking about, and what difference does this make to their client? And what difference does this make to their client? And how is their client experiencing them? So I'm always thinking with probably, I don't know, 30% of my attention is not directly on the conversation, is that how is this affecting the client relationship? And that's because in my philosophy, I talk about who we are is how we coach. So if you're going through a bad time at home, let's say, and you're a bit depleted in energy, my assumption is that at some level that will affect how you are with your clients. If you're worried about your coaching business and you're like COVID, who isn't worried about that business, and it's like, oh my goodness, how is this going to affect your confidence? Might drop as a coach, and you might think, any drop in business is not because of COVID, it's because I'm a bad coach. So for me, it would think, okay, so, and how is that impacting on your relation with your clients? There could be some ethical issues. Are you prepared to take people you wouldn't normally take as a coaching client because you want the work? So I think that's what makes it supervision. And when you talk about reflecting on your own work and feel what you feel, that's my little check-in. How am I feeling about this 30%? Did it get attention? So yeah, we all have our own little ways of sort of reviewing what went on and understanding if what we did is genuinely supervision. Thank you, David. Other thoughts, other questions?
There are some thoughts in the chat box for you, Michelle. Louisa said it was nice to feel, again, that important word, feel, that I had a space to talk rather than being the person to hold the space for their clients. And I think that is a fundamental importance of supervision, that you've got this safe space to go to. You can't always just be there for your clients. Somebody has to be there for you. And presumably the same goes for you as a supervisor, Michelle. You've got your own supervisor. So it just goes up the chain, doesn't it?
It does. And that reminds me of a lovely quote, which is, you cannot serve from an empty vessel. So I think, we need to resource ourselves so that we can resource our clients or support our clients to be resourced. It is a bit about the chain. On the same way, we need to review our clients, and my supervisor needs to help me review my supervisees. It goes back down the other way. If my supervisor has good energy, she'll help me have good energy, and then I'll help my coaches have good energy, and they'll help their clients have good energy. So it's a ripple effect.
Another comment from Jean Elvira, who I understand is an experienced supervisor herself, and she was paired with Louisa, and said, very interesting and beautiful connection and discussion with Louisa. We can learn a lot from each other. Thank you.
Fabulous. Was somebody looking to speak? I thought I heard a little voice, but I didn't see who it was.
It was me that Dawn just said. It's really that we happen to have the same question that we might ask our supervisor, and it was really nice to hear that we were really working on something similar. Yeah.
See, there is sort of what they call it, serendipity in the world.
Yes, absolutely. Yes,
by
definitely.
chance,
thank you.
there's a connection.
Yeah, thank you.
Lovely. Well, let's just move on. There's my favorite slide. They do say save the best to last. This is my favorite slide, if I can get it to come up. So an optical illusion, you may have seen this before. And just invite you to use the chat function to tell me what you see. What can you see in this image? So Dawn started us off, so thank you. She can see two old people, two people wearing hats and one playing a guitar, and a lamp. Is the lamp in the middle, Dawn? I sometimes call it a goblet, yeah, but it's a lamp, yeah, lovely. Louisa's also saying two men, one playing a guitar and one on a pot on his head. Yes, they kind of form the faces of the older people. Any more that you can see? Yes, so there's a lady, I think, leaning on an archway, which forms the ear of the older man on the right hand side. That's Genevieve saw that. And Dawn is saying a vase, not a lamp. So yes, mind you, I don't know if you can see this, but if you can see that goblety thing in the middle, a vase in the middle, and the top of it is a kind of oval. If you cast your eyes upwards, it almost looks like a black lampshade to me, kind of shining lamp down. So maybe people can see that. Anna Louise has seen a clear bottle, and if I'm looking at the same thing, it's the almost like an earring of the old lady on the left hand side. And now I have a challenge for you. There is a rabbit somewhere in that picture. See if you can see the rabbit. Louise is also talking about two archways, and I'm imagining that that's at the top of the old people's heads. They're kind of brickwork here and there. Can you find the rabbit? Well, because of time, I'm going to just share with you the answer. He's down here. Can you see him on the cloth that is the kind of draped between the two people? Ah, and David can see a tortoise too. So my sense is that this might look like a bit like a tortoise on the shoulder of the old lady. Although I shared this with somebody else the other day, and they said, I think that's an elephant. Like, oh, really? And actually, it does look a bit like an elephant that's sitting down, and that's his trunk. So of course, the question is, what on earth has this got to do with supervision? And you might hopefully agree with me that when you look at this, you kind of see one thing, but then the more you see, or rather, the more you look, the more you see. When you engage with other people, they will see even more things that allows you to see those things too. And you have more choices. You can choose to see the older people, or you could choose to see the people sitting down. And that is a kind of metaphor really for supervision, because if I can get the thing to come up, together we see more. We can see more together than we can ever see alone. And that's why I think it is supervision. So that's about it from me. I'm online for another few moments if you have any questions or any comments, but it's been a delight to work with you all. Thank you for your engagement, and I think we're probably close to time. So I'm very happy to stay on, but in Dawn's hands.
Thank you, thank you. Olivier has just sent her apologies. She said, I have to leave, I'm in between appointments. This was very insightful for somebody who needs to consider supervision, as she has recently become IAPC&M accredited. So well done, Olivier. So lots of comments here. Brilliant presentation, amazing, thank you. Just remind us, perhaps, if you will, Michelle, where we can get hold of you in the event that we want to start that supervision journey, please.
Oh, that's kind. Thank you. My company is Greenfields. My website is there. This was a bit of personal information that I shared with Dawn. She said, if I'm introducing you, it might be good to have something that's not work related. In lockdown, I decided to try my hand at baking, not very successfully. I will reassure you, I am a better supervisor than I am a baker, promise. But here we go. That was my contact details. And you just put Michelle at greenfieldsconsultancy.co.uk and you'll reach me. I'm also on LinkedIn if you want to connect there.
Lovely. So people can join you for a virtual slice of that yummy looking cake, says Claz, and a tea or a coffee, and add to their CPD, because I know accredited practitioners are very hot on CPD. So I love, as part of the IAPC and assessment team, I love what you were saying right at the beginning, Michelle, about just because you've got 100 hours or 200 hours doesn't mean that one is necessarily a better coach, because you could have just repeated that 200 hours with bad habits, without developing your skills, and therefore doing a disservice to your client. So that was a big takeaway for me. So thank you for that. And we normally end these sessions by just saying 60 seconds, just write in the chat box. And if not, if you don't want to share, then just write personally what it is that you're going to do differently as a result of listening to Michelle in this part 1 of 2 calls. Because when we write up our CPD at the end of the week, or even at the end of the day, we'll have forgotten some gems. So just take 60 seconds now in silence, thinking about what is it you're going to do differently, what you got out of today, please.
Michelle, I just wanted to say thank you. This is Claz here. Sorry, it probably seems like I hadn't been engaging throughout the whole thing, but I was just really aware that I came in a bit late. So I just was keen to listen and observe and maybe pick up on things that I might have missed as a result of being late. But thank you so much. And I consider myself a novice coach. I'm under 2 years old, and I don't have that much, I don't have that many coaching hours, let's say. I coach about 3 hours a week. So one of the things that you mentioned was that sometimes people feel like they don't have enough clients, or they don't do enough coaching to feel like they don't merit supervision. But actually, ever since I qualified as a coach, I've always wanted supervision, because as you mentioned, you know, you come out of a coaching session and you really reflect, well, at least I do, I really reflect on how that went, what was my inner world, what was going on in my inner world when, you know, the client was speaking, how much of my inner world was I bringing to that conversation or to my questioning. So, you know, those are the kind of things that I would really like to bring to an objective opinion and supervision on. So I picked up a lot of from your presentation, and definitely I've got a few action points here. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. And you might want to think about group supervision. I think A, it tends to be cheaper because you're sharing the time with other people. And B, you know, I talk to internal coaches particularly who are, you know, they're coaching alongside a day job. And I say, you know, group supervision is an opportunity to keep your coaching muscles toned, because what tends to happen, and it still happens for me, you know, I go into supervision with other coaches, and as they're talking about their clients, I'm thinking, oh God, yes, you know, I can really imagine being there, and oh yeah, that reminds me of this client. And you kind of re-enliven your joy of coaching through being around other people that are reflecting on theirs. So you kind of keep fresher, even though you haven't got any more clients or any more hours. But being with other coaches talking about coaching keeps your coaching muscle really healthy. So yeah, you might want to consider group supervision if you know, you're still early on in your practice and you haven't got that many clients.
Thank you. Yes, I will do.
Lovely.
Louisa sent you a message, Michelle, just to say she has a 12 o'clock appointment. So sorry to leave you. got so much out of the court, and we'll connect with you on LinkedIn. Huge thanks.
Oh, that's lovely.
So I think unless anybody has any more pressing questions, while we've got the lovely Michelle in the hot seat, ask them now. If not, you're invited to join us again and keep your questions for when we meet on Thursday, the 15th of October at the same time, 10:30 UK. Anybody who's missed the whole recording, it will be on the blog next week. And yeah, I think that's it. So thank you very much, Michelle. Loved the presentation, loved the energy. And I could certainly see why you make such a great supervisor. If I ever need one, a toss up between you or David. Got to be
Fight you for him. Fight you for him.
No. So I started to stutter there out of excitement. No, Michelle every time.
Yeah.
So I sort of like bow to. I sort of like bow to sort of like far greater experience.
Or indeed, my
It's only a
friend.
question of time, David.
Yeah. Or indeed, my French patriot there, Jean Elvira. You're a supervisor as well. You're on mute.
You're on mute.
Yeah.
I am a supervisor as well, and I'm so happy that I will be connecting with Michelle very soon. And it's really exciting for me now, because I'm very happy that I took a very good decision.
Well, we formed a new community, and we will stay in touch. Thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Yes,
Take care, everyone. Stay safe.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.